No time for a clever Pokemon Go joke. We've got a long episode to go through. And yes, I do realize the irony of taking 10 or so seconds to point that out. Last week, I took a look at those particular pieces of dialogue from Paper Mario Sticker Star and the potential relation to the Gamergate movement, along with why I take issue with Nintendo's explanation as to the origin of these lines. We're gonna move away from most of that, but you can watch last week's episode right here. I left that off saying that there was a larger issue at hand regarding the attitudes about this and other situations in gaming. I'll get to that in a second, but before we dive in, I feel like I need to make a quick aside. There are some of my gaming character plushes, the ones that I could fit on the shelf anyway. Here are some of the pop vinyls and other figures of game characters that litter my office. This Mega Man X figure is the first thing I ever earned money to buy. I'm rather fond of him. Here's all the games that I'm currently able to fit on my game rack. Between me and my wife, our home has 4 3DS's. And here's our amiibo collection. We said we'd only buy the ones we absolutely needed, and we bought a lot more. Now, I didn't just do that to show off. No, chances are, in fact, that you have stuff just like this, if not better. But I wanted to illustrate that I'm not some hipster snob in a partial suit talking down to regular gamers. But instead, I'm just like you. I love video games. Games are a huge part of what has shaped me as a person. But I see all these things happen in our culture, and we need to talk about them. If we don't, we will lose what we love about video games. And with that in mind, let's talk about what's genuinely missing from the game industry. To understand, let's look back at Nintendo's actual statement about that Paper Mario thing. As many have observed, when viewed in its entirety, the Nintendo Treehouse Live segment for Paper Mario Color Splash from E3 includes 2 jokes separated by commentary and gameplay that have no relation to each other. One joke has to do with Watergate, while the other is a nod to the Fun Guys from Mario Party 8. It was brought to our attention today that these 2 jokes have been spliced together and misconstrued as a crude reference to an online hate campaign. While we typically do not speak on localization matters, we feel the need to confirm that these jokes are not linked in the game and were never intended to be linked. Nintendo firmly rejects the harassment of individuals in any way, and was surprised to learn that this gameplay was misinterpreted in this manner. We've examined Nintendo's explanation already, so let's zoom out of that and look at the whole tone of this statement. First off, credit where it's due. Nintendo calling anything, let alone Gamergate, an online hate campaign, while true, is pretty powerful coming from a company such as Nintendo. However, this statement also highlights the incredible lack of empathy in the game industry. See, these lines in Paper Mario didn't just seem like a Gamergate joke, but a specific reference to a specific event that triggered this entire spiral downward, which was focused, at the time, on a single human being. And it might just be me, it's not, but Nintendo and people watching from the sidelines could have at least treated the poor person in the middle of this with some sort of direct decency. Would it have really killed Nintendo to have given some professional respect to a colleague in their own field? And now, before you type out a rebuttal saying this would be admitting that they did wrong, let me stop you. It is possible to acknowledge another person's feelings and emotions without yielding everything to that person. It's what real adults do, at least when they're not running for president. If you've ever had a disagreement with someone at your job, you can probably relate to that. In fact, it might even been more of a statement to directly address Zoe Quinn than reference GG, as it might have well been more genuine. This industry and its culture both are great at saying things, but not doing them. After all, Nintendo may decry GG now, but it's hard to take seriously when this isn't even the first time that this has been on their front door. Starting late last year, these online groups began to take issue with the localization changes made to Xenoblade Chronicles X and Fire Emblem Fates, including but not limited to some costume adjustments and aging up certain characters. There's actually a lot more weight in that, but we just do not have the time to cover it all. In classic Nintendo fashion, Nintendo chose not to address any concerns or talk to press in depth about these changes, forcing these groups to decide that someone was responsible and they were going to make someone pay. They collectively settled on one Allison Rapp, a member of Nintendo's marketing department, and for those keeping score at home, that's not a department that handles localization, who had been previously critical of Gamergate. Rapp ended up enduring months of harassment and threats just like Zoe Quinn and others, all for the actions of her employers. Eventually, she was let go from the company when Nintendo got wind of another job she had that they apparently didn't like. And now the details on this are dubious at best. Rapp believes harassers continued to dig through her personal life until they found something to get her fired, and Nintendo says that's not the case. These people took this as a win either way. Rapp's removal also highlighted the fact that this harassment had gone on for months without so much as a peep from Nintendo, and I would hardly call that a firm rejection of harassment of individuals. And that's just Nintendo. Most major publishers refuse to address or talk openly about the harassment going on in the underbelly of gaming communities. Others, the really messed up ones, appear to revel in it. Earlier this year, Gears of War creator Cliff Bleszinski tweeted about his dislike of Olivia Munn, which is fine, to each their own on that. But instead of just leaving it at that or explaining why that is, he later said that it was something about her behavior during Attack of the Show, he decided to invoke the tired old stereotype of the fake geek girl by saying that she was appropriating nerd culture, and leaving behind how completely ridiculous that sentence actually was. What the actual heck, Cliff? You work in the video game industry. You created the video game equivalent of Youngblood. There is no way on earth that you were not aware that you couldn't have summoned the harassers faster if you'd sacrificed Marcus Phoenix on an altar of anime body pillows. There are consequences to crap like that, man. By the way, the harassers, of course, couldn't just leave it there either. Before the day was done, Felicia Day, of all people, found herself on the receiving end of this kind of stuff for literally no reason. Just this week, one of Minecraft's creators, Notch, has been continuing what appears to be a crusade to embolden anew these who would go to war over the critique of video games. But credit where it's due again, he was actually pretty sympathetic to Zoe Quinn in regards to the whole Paper Mario thing specifically. But these are just recent examples. We could talk about Jennifer Hepler, whose children were threatened because people didn't like Dragon Age 2, or Sean Murray, who got death threats over a delay about No Man's Sky, or Brianna Wu, who hasn't even been able to properly grieve the loss of her dog because of messages she receives in response to her stance on representation in games, or David Vonderhaar, who received threats over tweaks to weapons in Black Ops 2. I could go on, and on, and on. Instead, back to Nintendo. And Sony, and Activision, and more. Because they have a hand in this. Since the dawn of the NES back in the 80s, games have been marketed directly to a very specific market. Boys. White boys, too, if anything can be inferred from these ads behind me. Things have only gotten worse as games have become more modern, with the AAA market deciding to focus directly on those same players as they've grown up. It's why the last generation and a half of games have basically featured this exact same guy right here. It's actually not hard to see where some of the fear comes from, however irrational it is. You see, the bubbles that some gamers live in and representation threaten to break were created in part by the games that we actually love. Sorry, but it's true. But games, all games are growing and evolving, as all art does. However, unlike other art forms, games are uniquely disposed. Games have always been a consumer art created for profit. After literally decades of being told by the game industry that you were the only one that mattered, seeing that change can be jarring, even if it was never actually true in reality. I mean, the screen said it was true after all. For some of these gamers, it's like spending your entire life as the only child, and then one day your parents reveal to you that there's been a sibling living in your room the entire time, and they've just decided that maybe taking care of all of their children might be a good idea. Naturally, the child whose life just radically changed might be inclined to, I don't know, throw a tantrum over this maybe? And if that child throws a tantrum, it's usually expected to be the responsibility of the parents to discipline that child. Of course, in this example, those parents are obviously not great at what they do. And if you didn't catch that, the game industry would be the parents in that little metaphor. and they are bad at what they do, neglecting entire audiences in favor of a small group of reliable customers that may make some green, but it also creates consequences. Now that these other audiences are being brought into the market, in no small part due to the fact that it makes good financial sense, and they're being catered to, the existing audience is throwing a tantrum. And yet, the creators of the problem do nothing. Nintendo still acts flabbergasted anyone would even think of Gamergate in relation to them. Noted game makers invoke these groups either on purpose or out of neglect. Others remain silent. Why? Why else? Money. While it is very clear that major gaming markets are getting too bloated and could use fresh vision in audiences, these markets are also too afraid of alienating the user base that they've spent so long grooming to buy expensive collector's editions and season passes, of course all before the game comes out. Actively standing against these online groups? It's noble, but is it financially savvy? They would think not. And yet, one company did it. Back in 2014, when the entire Gamergate mess was at its peak, Blizzard Entertainment's president and CEO Michael Morhaime opened BlizzCon by directly addressing the issue. I'd like to take a moment to talk about something serious. Over the past couple of months, there's been a small group of people who have been doing really awful things. They have been making some people's lives miserable, and they have been tarnishing our reputation as gamers. Now that's bold, especially right in the heat of what was going on. Blizzard has since put its money where its mouth is on the issue. When an African-American Hearthstone tournament player started getting racist spam in the chat of a Twitch stream earlier this year, Blizzard openly decried that turn of events and have been working directly with Twitch to ensure that it doesn't happen again in the future. New Armor in World of Warcraft has seen changes based on conversations team members have had with their daughters about women's clothing in games. And then they made Overwatch, a game with cowboy, ninjas, soldiers, blue spider women, overweight characters, a woman with a prosthetic limb, and robot Dalsum. A game with an extensive focus away from direct aggression or themes consistent with AAA shooters. A game that even suffered its own controversy over a particular character's butt. And yet, Blizzard released this game, complete with controversial character on the front, and sold 10 million copies and counting. It's not just Overwatch either. Mirror's Edge Catalyst was released in a market that not long ago was afraid to release games with female protagonists because it made focus groups uncomfortable. It wasn't long ago that Assassin's Creed Unity devs couldn't come up with a decent excuse for not having female characters in multiplayer outside of it being work. Yet, the following year they managed to put out a far better Assassin's Creed, Syndicate, with a fully realized female lead. Monument Valley has become one of the new faces of modern gaming thanks to House of Cards, and it has a little girl as its lead. Transgender characters are starting to make more appearances in games too, though there's more work to be done there for sure. And character creation tools are growing in response to players embracing the power of these unique characters. The professional Smash Bros. Community created the Smash Sisters campaign. It's a program that encourages women to play the game in a safe environment. Heck, Cliffy B himself put gender-neutral bathrooms in his upcoming game Lawbreakers as a big middle finger to North Carolina's bathroom bill. And that's just gender stuff. Both Watch Dogs 2 and Mafia 3 will release this year with African-American protagonists. Prey will live again with an Asian protagonist. The GTA series has always been particular with its depictions of race in games, and the Saints Row games don't care what you decide to be. BioWare games have always been progressive in depictions of sexual relationships, even in the face of critique. But Stardew Valley will let you marry anyone you want as long as they're of age. And all the while, Fallout 4 lets you have multiple relationships, even at the same time. It is possible to stand up to bullies and not lose it all. It is possible to change our rhetoric and not lose what makes games great. But we can and will lose this progress if we refuse to protect it. We should expect better from those that make games and from those who play them. That's pretty good.